Hello, my fellow kin. Some massive changes just dropped today for the June Dataslate, and we're going to take a quick look together at everything that affects our favorite faction. First up, we have some pretty big changes to some of the core rules in the game. First one being modifying a stratagem's CP cost. Now for modifying, we don't have any units that actually benefit or interact positively or proactively with this rule, but we can be on the receiving end, unfortunately. The big change here is that for models that increase the CP cost for our strats, like the Kalidas Assassin, we now have some degree of counterplay involved, as the model must be within 12 inches of our unit benefiting from the strat. Enemy models with this ability will now need to be a little bit more exposed and vulnerable to get this ability off. It's a solid change for the game as a whole, and for us in particular, who usually will be using strats outside of 12 inches in the shooting phase. So simply put, don't be within 12 inches of a model with this ability, and your CP cost will stay the same. The next big one here that impacts us are strats that prevent us from shooting units outside of 12 inches. This is notoriously seen with Canoptic Court Doomstalkers. The strat can now only be used if our attacking model is within 18 inches in shooting. So effectively only shutting out a 6-inch no-shoot zone. This is fantastic. I can't tell you the number of times I've wanted to blast the Doomstalker off the deployment zone objective, but my opponent has access to making his unit untargetable. I think this is a nice change, as opponents will need to be a little bit more thoughtful about vulnerable positioning to make use of this strat. It also means we continue to be effective, more so with an SP conversion beamer outside of that 18-inch bubble. So pretty solid. We're not going to really find ourselves in situations most of the time where we're going to be shut out from shooting an opponent, so long as we stay outside of 18 inches to begin with. The last one here is for armies that essentially get a full unit back once it's destroyed via stratagems. It is now limited to just once. I think this is a great change because in some matchups we no longer need to play around screening endlessly against this play. We now have a little bit more breathing room once it has been used once. We know that it won't happen again, and we could reposition across the board. Some people also advocated for keeping the unit partially alive to avoid interacting with the strat, but at least this way you only deal with it twice. Okay, the next change is super exciting. We now have a formal definition of pivoting for vehicles. So for those of you who don't know, in games, whenever you're moving a vehicle and it's not moving in a straight line, i.e. meaning you're trying to rotate it, you have to move in such a way where you're deducting movement from that rotation. Always a bit of a saucy move in game, and it's now easily defined by simply docking 2 inches off of your move to pivot as much as you want in that movement. So, if I want to spin around in a circle, I just drop 2 inches from my movement and I can do a full 360 if I wanted to. Simply put, you pay 2 inches of movement tax to be able to pivot endlessly during the move for free. So you do this multiple times. I could pivot, pay my 2 inches, move like 90 degrees, drive straight, pivot again, and not pay the 2-inch tax because I paid it the first time, and then take the rest of my movement. So this is really, really solid. I like this change a lot. There are so many times where you just can't get to where you need to be because you're dancing around ruins. So this is a solid quality of life improvement, which I do think will be very impactful. Now, for 99% of us who are in this video right now, we also have this added restriction here for the Pariah Nexus mission pack, which indicates that the pivot rule also affects models that do not have round bases. So in this case, our bikes now formally require a 2-inch tax to pivot. So even if we want to move half an inch, you pay the full 2 inches. A bit of a slight nerf, I would say, but overall, I think it's a big win for our vehicles. Okay, another important change to note is the subtle meshing of mortal wounds and devs. I think they finally got it right this time. So essentially, we now have a full interaction between devastating wounds and mortal wounds. So a devastating wound is now a mortal wound, but it does not distribute over the remainder of the squad. It is just for that one specific damaging hit, or wound in this case. So for example, you roll a 6 on your wound, you inflict it, and there's no spillover. If you had devastating 6, for example, you just take 6 damage on that one target, that one model. It's not going to spill over like regular mortal wounds do. So devastating wounds, you can look at it as if they're self-contained mortals that are going to impact one wound roll that does not spill over. I think this is a really good change. It's a big buff to armies that suffered from not being able to have good saves against devastating wounds, but had feel no pains against mortals. So now you can use those saves on the dev wounds without having the dev wounds act as mortal spillover for the rest of the people playing this game. Specifically to Votann, I'm thinking about the Vulcanites here. If you're shooting at a target that has a really solid feel no pain for mortal wounds, well, they're going to now be taking that save against your Vulcanite dev wounds. So this is something to keep in mind. A slight nerf if you're shooting at something that has a good mortal feel no pain. But otherwise, I think it's a good change for the game. Some armies, I think Custodians in particular, probably like this a lot. Couple key changes to the universal strats as well. The first one is command rerolling. So this is a quality of life improvement in my opinion. The improvement here is that you can now legally fast dice and then pick out of those dice something to CP reroll. It's pretty cool. It's quality of life improvement. It helps speed up the game, gives you full visibility on the outcome of your dice when deciding to use this ability or not. So I think it's fine. Next up is Tank Shock, which got a lot stronger for us. So we now roll a number of dice equal to our toughness, still capping at 6 mortals. This change means that land forts pull up with 12 dice, Sagittars with 10. It also means you need to be a lot more careful when you're getting charged by vehicles in return, adding significantly more dice to the mix for vehicle on vehicle action. This also means if you're playing against knights, for example, you're going to be facing a lot fewer dice when you're getting tank shocked in return. This is really good. I think this is a nice win. It always felt a little bit weird when you get tank shocked by an armiger or something, and then you have to deal with 14 mortal wound dice being rolled. Now, in the Pariah Nexus mission pack, there are 2 very important changes to note. The first one, recover assets, is no longer a fixed mission option. I know a lot of people, myself included, looked at this one with the intention of baking it into the list because it is really powerful. I'm kind of happy it's not staying because I do think Votann would struggle to take this away from their opponents, who could have potentially just ripped points all game using lone ops. So good change for the health of the game in my opinion. I do think it would be way too easy to get 20 points on this, so I'm happy it's going away. Second, for Call the Horde, those cheeky kids who wanted to drop a single model from their units can still choose to do so, but that unit will still give up the full amount of points and eligibility for Call the Horde. So I love how proactive the balancing team was on this and didn't leave the exploit in the game until the next patch. Before I get into the Votann specific stuff, I really cannot stress enough how many changes were made in this patch. It is a massive overhaul to the game. A lot of people are calling it edition 10.5 instead of 10th edition, and I do agree there are some massive changes. I couldn't put everything in this video, but if you are curious to read through it, which I would recommend you do, I'm going to put a link to every single article in the description below. Now, getting into the Votann specific stuff, there were actually a couple of unfortunate nerfs for our detachment and faction rule. Apparently, we're no longer able to apply our tokens to units that are starting the game in transports using Ruthless Efficiency. I think this is a little bit inconsistent with the ability to still put tokens on things that are in reserves. I'm not too sure why there is this discrepancy here. The implication with one is that you can't add it to something not on the table, which directly contradicts the other. It's a bit sad into certain matchups where you care about killing the thing inside the transport once it comes out, like Plague Marines for example. The next nerf here is I suppose a clarification where you no longer get your CP from the destroyed judged unit that you judged at the beginning of the game until the attached characters from that unit are also destroyed. Those characters do however keep their tokens after the bodyguards are eliminated. I believe WTC already ruled this way, which I suppose is good to see some consistency across the rule sets. It's a bit tougher for us to achieve now if a character lives and runs to the hills, which does typically happen, but it's not the end of the world. I do think that this injunction with the application of token changes, being that restriction to not putting it inside of units that are in transports, does mean that we're going to need to be a little bit more selective and perhaps more thoughtful in our application at the start of the game. In terms of points, no changes. I think this is fine. I was a little concerned bikes would go up to 100 with Pariah Nexus, but I'm really happy to see them stay the same. This means there's still some good incentive to run any of our archetypes being either Sagi spam, bike spam, or more triple land fort lists. If Uthar came down, I was honestly legitimately considering taking him for secure assets fixed, but both of those dreams are now dead, and it's probably for the best. They'll stay on the shelf. You may notice we do have a little extra something here, and yes, my friends, the Yars are in, and they are in at just 80 points. Amazing price. A lot of people, myself included, feared that these would be much closer to 100. I actually suspected they'd be seen at 115. I'm really happy to see them at a very, very viable points cost. I do think you're going to always take one of these for their native infiltrator value, and depending on what kind of list you're running, how many Sagittars you take, you're probably going to want to take a lot more of these. Alright guys, thanks for tuning into this week's video. A ton of changes just dropped at once, and I'm sure all of you, like myself, are very excited to jump into games and start testing things out. What do you think about the changes today? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.